pandemics, financial crisis, closed borders. These things can cause us a lot of worry, but Jesus redirects our perspective when he says in Mark 13 that these things must happen. And then in John 16, he promises us that in this world we will suffer, but take courage, for I have overcome the world. The reality is that the coronavirus and cancer and death, these are biological realities, consequences of living in a world infected by sin. But fortunately, our pilgrimage through this world is temporary. One day we will live in a new creation where sin and death, our spiritual enemies, will no longer have a place. And you know what? This is not the first time the church has faced a situation like this. In fact, in the past, the church has faced much, much worse. In 160 AD, in Rodney Stark's book, The Rise of Christianity, he talks about an epidemic that swept across the Roman Empire. And it's estimated that between 25 to 30% of the population died. That is unfathomable. I mean, that is apocalyptic. And yet, Christians in the early church were not shaken. Their faith was exemplary. Christians demonstrated radical love by helping those around them. And many contracted the disease, but they died full of hope. And millions testified to this courage, this radical courage that Christians had, and the church grew. I go to Romans chapter 8, and I read that chapter, and it is so encouraging. In fact, what we realize is that every single book of the New Testament was written in the context of massive suffering and persecution and epidemics and war and death. And it is in this context, the context of the extreme crisis of life, that Scripture and the gospel makes the most sense. In fact, when things are going well, it seems like Scripture makes less sense. But now, what happened is when the Apostle Paul was writing in Romans chapter 8, and he was talking about the reality of the resurrection, and then again in 1 Corinthians 15, as he said that these crises, yes, they're hitting us, but the resurrection of Christ is more powerful than any circumstance that can possibly hit us in this life. And that is the reality. In fact, what does he say at the end of Romans chapter 8? That I am confident that nothing can separate us from the love of Christ. Why does he say that? Because he was being hit by so many things, sickness and persecution and epidemics and all of these things, and yet he was able to move forward, knowing that he was deeply connected with the love of Christ. And as a result, that freed him to love those around him. And as we ponder these things, we can confidently say that to live in this life, we will live for Christ. And then to die, that's even better. We can pray for those in need. Secondly, we can reach out to the isolated in our communities, reach out to single adults, reach out to the elderly, reach out to those who are sick, reach out to those who are homeless or are living in temporary housing. And number three, we can help those in need. We can give to local food banks. We can help families watch their kids since there's no school. We can care for the sick. What people need more than anything right now is hope, grounded in the gospel, lived out and experienced in community. In these anxious days, the church can shine as a light. We have no fear of what is to come. On the contrary, it is our greatest opportunity to share the hope that we have in Jesus before a world that is desperately in need. So may you be filled by His Spirit to act for His glory in a time such as this, with a smile on your face and hope in your heart and radical love for those in need.